Just make sure you stay in the
Yes.
window.
Okay.
Hi, everybody.
All right. Good morning. Sorry about the hiccups. I'm grateful that there are people here who have the gift of working with technology, because I would have just hit the computer a few times, and if that didn't work, then that was it. So last week we began our adult forum series on what is going on in Reading and Shasta County. And so we kind of went on a whirlwind tour of answering that first question: what is going on? So the second question is, why is it going on? And so we are going to do a quick review of last week before we jump in for today. So we are following practical theological reflection, which is a really fancy way of saying theology for living, allowing what we believe to affect what we do. And so one popular method is the 4 questions. What is going on? Why is this going on? What should be going on? That's the big $1 million theology question. And then what should we do? And so this kind of provides a template for looking at the world around us, saying, what do we believe about God revealed in Jesus Christ? And then knowing as best we can those 2 things, how do we go out into the world? What does that look like? So those are the 4 questions. Any questions about the 4 questions? I didn't script this. Okay, so my summer focus is largely on those first 2. What is going on and why is this going on? And then I started to do some, let's say, some work ahead of you in the theology question. What should be going on? Because that's also our work together. One of the things I love about the Lutheran Church is that I don't get to come in and say to you, this is what you're going to believe, and you have to believe it. That when we talk about our faith, we talk about faith as a community together, and we look at what that means. And so the questions of what should be going on in God's eyes and what should we do, those are questions that we always approach as a community. Questions about this? All right, excellent. I like to tell people, Lutherans are not the church that has the Pope. There is no central Lutheran authority. The Lutherans are not going to send a SWAT team in through the window because I said something that somebody didn't like, or that you believe something that is different. That's not the way the Lutheran Church works. We all do it together. It's a team sport. Yeah.
So, Bob, when we get to the what should we do part, is that what should we do as a church? Like, would that relate to our goals or our plan? You know, in the past we've had 5-year plans. We've had, is that to focus us in on what we as a church, as this church, should do?
It certainly can. That's part of the communal reflection. Might lead to things that we can do as individuals, kind of, for lack of a better term, infiltrating the community. Some of it may be official church programs. Some of it may be kind of rippling. What I do affects somebody else, and so they may do something that affects somebody else. So there are lots of different ways that we could go. It's not necessarily official, this is a church program. It may end up being, it may end up manifesting itself in different ways. That's part of the beauty, I think, of the 4 questions, that we're not hemmed in, and that will kind of be reflected in, what should be going on, because different how you answer that question will definitely affect what should we do, and then maybe how should we do it because that's what I'm hearing in that question, how will we do it? So that's a great question, and I'm going to need you to hold on to it for a while and keep me honest as we keep going through this and say, especially when we get there, how does this play out? Thank you. Any other questions? All right. So the method I use, I'm going to try to go quickly through this. The method I use, conversations. I just asked people. You don't know unless you ask. Asking for resources took me to people and places I didn't necessarily expect. I talked to 10 people and I reflected on Deuteronomy. And you are now in the third week of suffering through what I found in the book of Deuteronomy. But why Deuteronomy? It's an extended commentary and meditation on the 10 Commandments. And I realized I had a poor choice of words last week. So I'm going to say Deuteronomy is prescriptive and descriptive. There will be no one in need among you. Descriptive. Prescriptive. Thank you. I had a 50-50 chance. There will be no one in need among you. 4 verses later, if there is among you anyone in need. And so it shows God's aspiration for God's world, but then a practical bent that the world is not going to be as God desires it. And so we need support in helping to assuage the problems of the world. Any questions? All right. From now on, I'm not going to say any questions. If you have a question, just say it. So the people that I talked to from Empire Recovery Center, Stephen Campbell, who has been involved in ministries all over this city, Children's Legacy Center, Doug McMullen, a doctor formerly in a private practice, and now he is the city's doctor, goes out in homeless encampments on many boards. Marty Mosley from Mosley Family Sellers, learned a lot about the economy of Shasta County with him. Mimi Mosley at Good News Rescue Mission. Talked with Eddie McAllister, Shasta Beloved Community. Talked with representatives from Northern Valley Catholic Social Service and Pathways to Housing. And then Tim Danielson, formerly of Salvation Army here in Reading and now with United Way. The questions I asked. What's your role, official and perceived? My role is pastor, but if I go walking down the street, somebody might say, hey, that's the guy who, they might not necessarily know me by my role. And so I ask people about their roles, what their official roles are, how people see them. What needs are you addressing? Why do these needs exist? And then community strengths, impediments, existing programs, resources, what's missing, what needs improvement, and then what would you have people do if you had resources to attend to these things? Yeah, Diane.
So you didn't talk to any city or county elected or officials in that capacity?
Not yet.
Why not? Oh, it's
not yet.
Yeah.
Yeah. The interviews, when I said, do you have resources? I was expecting videos, books. They refer me to other people. And so what was a list of 10 people became a list of 30 within a few weeks. And so my plan now is to continue that work by talking with people on a monthly basis rather than as sabbatical work, because there was simply too much to process. And so that work will continue on. Any other questions? All right, excellent. All right, a recap, what's going on? Not enough beds to support the county's homeless population, not nearly enough to support between 1/6 and 1/7 of the county's homeless population. Generally speaking, this is in the passive, let's say generally speaking, people do not treat other people with compassion, dignity, and respect. There is a lack of positive vision of who people can be. That is to say, let's make it active again. People do not share a positive vision of who other people can be. The cost of living is unsustainable for many people in this area. Local government upheaval hinders the ability to meet needs. That is not a political statement. That is a statement of we are having a huge problem with this, with who I call civil servants in the county. We are having trouble filling positions, and what that means is that grants and support that used to be readily available are now getting held up or withheld, which snowballs into disaster for people who are trying to do that work in the county, but now find that their resources are dwindling or disappearing. I realize that was a lot. Questions? Excellent. What else is going on? Generational trauma, which is to say that we tend to pass on the hurts that were inflicted upon us. And also, we tend not to consider the hurts that have been passed on to other people. So I'm never a blank slate encountering you, another blank slate. We have already been written on by generations before us, even in ways we're not really aware of. And then a lack of understanding or disagreements about what's even actually going on. Some people said, we don't have enough resources in this county to help people. Other people said, well, we have plenty of resources, but there's no communication. Some people said, homelessness has never been this big a problem. Some people said, the situation with homelessness is better now than it's been in 30 years. And so there is a lack of understanding even of the situation, or maybe that we see things ourselves, but don't try to reach out to other people to find out what they are perceiving. So, finally, why is this going on? All right, so this second question is a little messier because the relationship between cause and effect is not always clear-cut. Sometimes what looks like an obvious cause and effect is not necessarily what's happening. And sometimes causes and effects are blurred together. So sometimes a what is going on answer can also be a why, or vice versa. Did I say that correctly? Okay. I have to check with my wife because she studied with the person who created the 4 questions. And so I am a student, but she is the authority.
Oh, great.
How much you know it. Okay, so, and this is a space where if you want, we can have a little bit more conversation around this. This will be partly what you want to make it. There is enough why that we don't have to cover it all today. We can also continue to explore it next week. But the first thing that I would say feeds a lot of what is going on. Community, and I say is becoming atomized, by which I mean breaking down into smaller parts. That is to say, groups that used to exist, fellowships that used to exist, communities no longer exist, or they're breaking down into smaller units. It's a breakdown of connections between individuals. And I've heard 2 explanations for this. One is that we have an epidemic of loneliness. I have talked to other pastors who have said in forums or in other places, said to their congregation, raise your hand if you don't see anybody else during the week. And the number of people who raise their hands is both unsurprising given this and also heartbreaking. Yeah.
Don't you think a lot of that has developed out of the COVID scare?
Yeah, I think that it's certainly been exacerbated, which is, it not only is, it's becoming, it continues to get worse. COVID made it harder, not only in the sense of people being asked to isolate themselves, but also in the partisanship that came out of the response, which is to say, and we'll see that I think in a couple slides. I have something about that. But you're absolutely right. Yeah, Jackie.
I think this was a problem before COVID.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Much more so. And I think that, that people did come together during COVID. You know, there was a lot of separating yourself too, but you got a lot of, I mean, I would be in the store and, or wherever I was, and people would smile and, you know, or step aside if I was trying to get by.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think it was, I think COVID did a couple of things.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't just all separating.
And I think this also feeds into that blurring between what and why, which is to say, in some sense, you know, Gus, when you mentioned COVID, in some ways it exposed cracks that were already beginning to develop in society. And it made it much worse. It made it happen much faster. Yeah, Diane.
I think I agree with Jackie before, and I think it is, we're at this epitome of it's almost, I don't know what percentage, but it's a very high percentage of both parents working in the household or both spouses working. And before we had a lot more people who volunteered because that's what the stay-at-home mom or whatever political thing you wanted. I don't care whether it's a church or whatever kind of group you're in, they're struggling for the volunteers. And when you have the volunteers, you have this community. Now we're busy just trying to maintain the lives of working and getting what we need to do with our children. We don't have time to volunteer.
Yeah.
You know, so I think the loss of volunteers has eroded, and it's been a slow erosion, just like anything else. That's what erosion is. And now
Yeah, Jackie.
I'd like to say that when I first came here, and Dan was the deacon that I reported to, and I want you to know that we covered so much ground and how different we are, how the same we are. We talk about each other's backgrounds. And if you can get someone like that to connect with, a whole lot of stuff that you've been believing all along will wash a lot of that stuff away. I stayed here, and I was so comfortable here because of her.
Thank you.
I think what Jackie is saying actually feeds into even a wider pattern. I think a lot about, and there are some of you in this room that I've talked to about this. I think a lot of what we are experiencing as a society right now is that 500-year cycle, that every 500 years, everything is just like all the cards are thrown up in the air and you have to wait for them to settle so that you can reshuffle them. And it's a scary time in a lot of ways. I think about the last time this happened 500 years ago was the Reformation. And I don't think we today can understand just how unsettling that would have been, not just for faith, not just for, how you worship and who you worship with, but for everything in life. Because at that time, the church was the center of your community. Everybody, like a parish, comes from the concept that there's one church in your little town or in your part of the city, and everybody goes there. Everybody knows each other. Everybody's part of the same community of worship and of life. And so when you leave your house, everybody you see is somebody that you're worshiping with on Sunday, and you're running into at, their version of Wednesday Night Life and, all those types of things.
And they all worship every Sunday.
And because it was expected, it was required that you be a member of the local church. You be a Christian in at least that nominal sense and in that practice sense in order to be a legitimate member of society. You couldn't register to be a citizen outside of the church at that time. So you had no choice. You had to be there. And then when Martin Luther and all these other people that followed him ended up breaking off, you didn't know how people were going to take you, right? Like I could go outside and before Martin Luther, I could see Fred and I would know that Fred is somebody that I have something in common with. We have this assumption about how life works, what is the center of our life, the structures and organization of our lives. But now, well, Fred might be one of those Lutherans. And I don't know,
Baptist.
and I don't know what's going on over there. What are they doing? And is he gonna be mean to me? Is he gonna treat me poorly because I'm not like him, decreasing concern for those unlike us? I don't know that it's necessarily a decreasing concern. I think it's I don't know what to do with this, and so I pull back. A lot of the people that just stay home all the time, it's because they don't know who to talk to. They don't know, they know that there are lots of people out there who are economically failing and desperately working, and they don't want to be a bother and add another thing to somebody else's plate. And so I think that this really big picture change that we're experiencing as a society in that 500-year cycle is a lot of this.
I'm not trying to take over the meeting here. I do have something else I'd like to add. I had invited Pastor Bob to come to the development where I live. It's a senior citizens development. And I've been up and down and up and down. I had talked, first of all, to the manager. And she said, I think that's a wonderful idea, Jack.
We talked about having, we talked about having a worship service or a worship gathering at this center.
So when it came up to the vote, to just show you, and it was turned down. Well, first of all, it was turned down because Ev put all the talk about it on the wrong station. Oh, no. It was not supposed to be stationary from HUD. It was supposed to be. And I told her that I want this to come from me, which was supposed to do. But anyway, it was turned down. But here's the cute part about it. When I started talking to people about why it was turned down, one of my neighbors said, well, we just don't go for that stuff. I said, what stuff? She said, well, that stuff, anyway, she had gotten Martin Luther King hooked up with Martin Luther. And I'm saying to her, now wait a minute now, Martin Luther was back, I think, in the 15th century. Well, who are you talking about? She told me, well, he died, and I said, well, yeah, everybody does. But what she was trying to say was that he was assassinated. She didn't say that. She just said, well, he died, didn't I? said, well, of course he did. We all, died. And so as we go, she said, well, wasn't he killed by? I said, I think at one time people were running after him. The Catholic Church was running after him to do away with him. But I think he died a natural death, And when I finally figured out, I said, now who are you talking about? I'm talking about Martin Luther from the 15th century. Now who are you talking about? And that's when she told me, Martin Luther King. I said, no, we got to Martin. First of all, Martin Luther King, let's not lose the past. You see how people get things so confused. And then they share that with other people who don't know any better, and they take it on as well.
And I do want to point out, I know that you just poo-pooed the next thing on the list, decreasing concern for those unlike us. But I do want to point out that that is somebody who said they don't go in for what Martin Luther King Jr. did. And there is something about that statement that speaks to, well, he's not like us. There, you know, what does that doesn't have anything to do with us. And that's what I mean when I say concern. Another word that I could have used, but I didn't think was broad enough, was decrease in empathy for those who are unlike us. We tend to reserve our empathy for people who are in our group, whereas people who are not in our group are not deserving of that empathy. And that feeds into and accelerates the feeling of atomization.
Doesn't fear play a little bit into that?
Oh, I think so. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that sometimes when we see anger or frustration, those are also manifestations of fear. Because there are, I don't know if I put it in this one or not. We'll have to see. But there are different ways that we can engage things that are different. And many of them are results of fear. We can oppose them. We can ignore them. We can just criticize or complain about them, or we can embrace the opportunity that it presents. But a lot of those are fear-based responses, because that is, you know, in a way, we're wired to do that. We have that survival instinct as human beings. And so that is something that, you know, it is not, I would say, not an evil impulse. It is what comes with being human. The question is, are we willing to engage that? Are we willing to follow that feeling in the sense of asking where it comes from and where it goes? Another one, the extremism of freedom. That's not my phrase. That's a phrase that showed up in the New York Times last week, which is to say we've reduced freedom from something that is positive for the buildup of community into something that has just become freedom from constraint. You don't tell me what to do. I have, you know, I can say what I want. I have freedom of speech, but then I also somehow have freedom of consequences from anybody who wants to question me. And so, as Christians, we think that freedom is for something else. But yes, yeah.
So I think primarily this is mainly looking at kind of the people who economically need assistance. But something this is making me think of is with my work, my coworkers, they're all educated people and they've gone through trainings and empathy and how to, you know, approach others. But I feel like during the past 4 or 5 years with COVID and politics, we can be really hurtful to each other. And so I hear, you know, my coworkers who I respect and usually get along with each other, they're arguing over vaccination status and they're just mean to each other in both ways, and politics just being hurtful. And so it's not just people who are struggling with financially and we're working to help, but also people kind of at the same level as you who work with really well. I think a lot of people just struggle to be able to understand other people and approach different thoughts in a healthy way. And that's been hard for me at work, like to hear those kind of conversations.
Thank you.
And the desire to hear them, you know, the desire to continue to be in relationship with them. I think, you know, from the previous slide, can you go back? what was I thinking about? Oh, the rootlessness of modern life kind of, made me think about, so humans are social animals, and so we're looking for connections, but the easiest connections are connections with people that are like us in as many ways as possible. And when we encounter someone who is not like us in an important way, at least something that's important to us at that moment, like vaccination status or what political party you vote for or whatever it is, then we have the option now of ignoring that, rejecting that, and going somewhere else, like the internet, where we can find people that, at least in that issue, are on the same page as us. And the internet is great for people who have that one issue kind of mentality, that they go from one issue to another, because you can go and you can find a community that is literally only talking about that. And so you're not going to discover that the person on the other end of that conversation is also a human that has other opinions that you might not completely agree with. And so you never have to encounter that issue of, hey, I've been building a relationship with you, and we found all these things that we have in common, but now we come up against a wall of, oh, this is an area where we don't agree. How are we going to navigate that? Well, the easiest thing for me to do is just say, I don't want you anymore. I'm going to go over here where I don't have that happen because I only talk to this person about this issue. And we, just go around and around in that echo chamber. And then I am freed from the constraint of having to, pull back myself in some way so that I can maintain that relationship with you. It is the choice to be in relationship with someone that disagrees with me is actually me putting constraints on myself so that I can maintain that relationship and not behave in a way that I know is going to be offensive to that person. And I'd rather just not do that, right? It's easier not to do that.
Okay. Partisan politics before people, and I think that's a good that's kind of a good segue in. And when I say this, I was trying to find the right word. One word that we've used in the past that felt like it was getting at it, but wasn't quite there, was tribalism. But tribalism implies a tribe and not a set of individuals who broadly share those same thoughts. We have a lack of genuine public spaces where we encounter people unlike us, which is to say, for the purpose of conversation, not conflict. I don't know if you've attended the Board of Supervisors recently. That is a public space where we encounter people for the purpose of conflict. That's what we want when we get there. There aren't too many people who go up to speak who are interested in having a conversation. There is a lot of arguing about what is happening that is right or wrong. But there aren't very many public spaces where we can encounter people who are different. I noticed besides those rare churches and organizations that have not filtered themselves out, which is to say, one pastor that I talked to said, when a church stops talking about theology, politics rushes in and fills that void. Which is to say, when churches stop talking about theology, politics rushes in to fill that void. And so even churches are falling, as I'm sure you've seen, churches fall prey to this very easily, because especially in an atomized space, I can say, well, I don't want to go there anymore. I don't agree, I don't agree with what they're saying. Not thinking about the process it takes to get there, not thinking about what it means to believe X, Y, or Z, but saying, I don't like the conclusion. I'm not comfortable with where that leads. So I'm going to remove myself from that space, which is another heritage of Martin Luther. Martin Luther said, you don't have to do anything. And so people said, okay, thank you, and did what they want to do, including attending the churches they want to attend.
Or none at all.
What's that?
Or none at all.
Or none at all.
Can I say one thing about this idea of public spaces?
Please do.
I think one of the things that I find interesting as a non-native to Reading, I know I'm around a lot of transplants to Reading, but it feels like Reading acts like a big kid, like the other big kid cities around, or thinks that it's a big kid. So, I think of Seattle or Los Angeles or San Francisco, Washington, D.C., or these other major metropolitan areas that deals with some of the same issues that we're dealing with here, but it deals with them differently in those other places. And Reading feels like it is this weird microcosm that isn't able to deal with things that other major cities are able to deal with because we're not those other cities. But we think we are. So it feels to me like some of the public spaces, if I was back in the LA Orange County area where I grew up, there would be other places to encounter people that are unlike me. Mm-hmm. Easily, where I could drive, half a mile to a major Korean area, or even further to an Indian area if I wanted, Indian food or something like that, where I could interact for the purpose of conversation without conflict. Whereas because of some of I think not only because of the geographic nature, Reading is not very large, and so it's this small little area, and then also because of its ethnic makeup, there's just a lot of same, which isn't necessarily to say problematic, that is problematic, but I think it's something we don't think about because, well, we're a major city. We're Reading, and yet we're not a major city.
And what? Yeah, Jackie.
And on that, we're not a major city, but it be a major city. The alliances between politics and churches is huge in this community. There's a big influence, and I think it just drives bipartisan relationships and the people. And we all know people in my business, or in my profession. I can't tell you how many patients. Anybody who was on the verge of retiring or leaving the state did so during COVID because of politics. And so we're in this we're unlike Southern California in that because we are different politically, and it drives the churches drive it. There's this really close relationship between some of the churches and what's going on in our city and county level. So, and I'm not making judgment about that. It's a fact.
Yeah.
Seems like compromise is now a dirty word.
Yeah. Jackie, did you raise your hand?
I was going to say that before I came up here, so many people had said to me, you don't want to go up there. But you want to go there. And they gave me a number of reasons why I may feel uncomfortable up here. I can only say that I'm so happy here, that I have made so many friends, and that this little small, because I call it a little small town, because I come from metropolitan areas, has a lot of things to do. One of my friends here at church, we go to an opera at the theater. And there's so many things that I wasn't looking for here that are here. But I was told that I was not going to be really accepted here. And if I'm not, I haven't learned about that part yet. Because it's been a good ride. I'm enjoying it.
And I think that speaks precisely to, if I've never met somebody like me or somebody unlike me, I can make whatever judgments I want to about them. But once I actually meet somebody, it's a different ballgame. It's a completely different ballgame. I've been in churches where votes have come up in the congregation about whether or not we're going to allow LGBT people to be married in the church, which is just to say, in our church structure, are we going to allow? I am not going to get further into that besides to say there was a vote about it without a single person who was LGBT being part of the church, which is to say it was a political football that was given to people who wanted to make a statement. Then, fast forward a few months, they found out that somebody in the congregation has come out. And all of a sudden, it's not, here's this political issue. What do you think? Are you for it or against it? Make your decision. We're going to vote on it. We're going to divide over it. And it was, have you met Steve? Steve's a really nice guy. You know Steve. He's so-and-so's nephew. You know Steve. He runs the garage. He's a mechanic. You've known Steve for decades. And all of a sudden, it stops being about how are we going to decide what we believe separate from the experience of other people. It's one thing to say we're going to have this vote and we're going to decide whether or not to do X, Y, or Z. And it's another thing to say, okay, you look into Steve's eyes and tell him no. You've known him for decades, tell him no. And that was one thing that I was told at seminary. How you respond to that moment is what you actually believe about it. You can have all of your written white papers that you want, but theology is lived. It's not read or agreed upon in a book somewhere. It's lived.
I like that point because a lot of times you just don't know. If someone is homosexual, a lot of times maybe you won't know until they tell you. But also with many other things, if someone's struggling with addiction, sometimes you don't know, or someone in the family is, or if they're struggling financially, we just don't know. So it's best to not judge people, even from people you just don't know.
I mean, Jesus said that, so I think that's a pretty firm thing to say. No, I appreciate that you said that because that also speaks to the when theology rushes out of the church, politics rushes in, and we forget that. I'm glad you reminded us of that Jesus said that because there are some things of Jesus that we prefer to forget that he said.
Well, and isn't it true that we make the assumption that because we share something with someone else, that we share everything with them? That, we're here in the church and I'm chatting with Kevin and, I just make some offhanded comment about, well, those gay people or those black people or, whatever it is, I believe, not thinking about the fact that, hey, maybe Kevin doesn't have the same opinion as me on this. And then if Kevin calls me out on it, then I'm all offended and, oh, well, now you're not, we're not insiders together anymore now, you're one of those people. But, and it's because I stuck my own foot in my mouth, right? And made an assumption that I should have made or, shared something that was flippant or rude that I wouldn't have said in front of somebody that I knew to be in that category of person. And so I think we want everyone to be exactly like us. And when we have a little bit in common, we can make a lot of assumptions and that's when we end up putting our feet in our mouths. But if we don't do whatever, we just assume that everyone has their opinions and never treat anyone or speak about anyone in a bad way, then you don't get into that trouble.
Yeah, Jackie.
Are we ever going to discuss, what is it, LB? Are we ever going to discuss that as a church?
The alphabet is a church.
We certainly can. LGBT.
Yeah.
I
get the letters.
The ELCA has a document called "Talking Together About Difficult Issues," which is not dedicated to just the issue of people who are LGBT in the church, but as a guideline for how to talk together reasonably, how to talk together in a healthful way. about different issues that come up in the church. So we certainly can talk to me later, and we can figure out what that looks like, because I think that's another part of being the church, the ability to talk about this together. And the ELCA actually has a much more nuanced way of talking about difficult issues in a way that tries to avoid the partisan, are you for this or are you against this? That there are much more nuanced, pastoral, faith-based ways to have discussions. So thank you, Jackie.
And a plug, Mixed Bag Musings, all the videos are online forever. And we have addressed that issue a couple of times and several other types of outsider, insider, or what is going on over there kinds of questions.
Can you email those specific ones to Jackie this week?
I can.
Okay. And we've already, oh yeah, Mary Ann.
You know what, I just want to comment that this is new. For the people that have been going to this church for 20 years, this is not the position that was taken 20 years ago, right? Well, I mean, you wouldn't know. 20 years ago, but we didn't talk about these issues because of the divide that it would cause, and in fact has caused, because, you know, quite a number of people have left, you know, when the synod, you know, became more vocal about the position that the church was going to take. We lost a big chunk of people because of that. So while it's good that we're talking about this, there also are consequences, right, to some people in the church.
And it's up to us as a community together, I think, to commit to not making agreement on all issues the point of community. I think, personally for me, the point of, you know, the central point of this community is God revealed in Jesus Christ. And so we can talk about what that means. We can even have disagreements about points that are further out on the spectrum. But that doesn't change the central point of the church, the central gathering point. And I know most churches have not had discussions at all because we're afraid somebody might leave. And so we avoid talking about it. But all that does is allow those cracks to begin, and then when something happens that is a precipitating event, the dam bursts. And we don't have the basis for having the conversation. Or we see it as a zero-sum game. One of the things that I would say that the ELCA doesn't do particularly well is what I mentioned earlier. There is no Lutheran Pope. There is no magisterium. The synod can say something. The synod bishop can say something. And I am not required to believe or expound on what the bishop says. You are not required to. You're not required to believe what I say. Because that is not, it is not a system where you must agree to all points or else you are not properly part of the organization. That's not how the ELCA works. And the ELCA has time after time stepped on rakes because the ELCA has not let that be known over and over again. So many rakes the ELCA has stepped on and still steps on, because that is not, one of the things about the ELCA that was 20 years ago when this particular issue, that was just an example. I did not wish for it to become the topic of conversation. But the ELCA's first decision was not yes, it was yes or no. We leave it up to individual congregations in communities to have this discussion. But this is now something, the discussion of which is on the table. And many people just didn't want the conversation to even be on the table. But that is part of being a community, having that space, having the, I like this phrase, so I stole it from the British, Her Majesty's loyal opposition, which is to say, I disagree with what you think about X, Y, or Z, but I am not willing to let our disagreement dissolve our relationship. And that is something that we don't like the idea of being loyal opposition.
Well, we don't do it as Americans.
Yeah.
The basis of being an American or being America is based on our disloyalty. That we told the Queen we're not going to be loyal anymore, and definitely being opposition, opposing.
Yeah.
We're also Protestants,
We're also
and
Protestants.
So we protest.
that's literally what that is,
Yeah,
right?
so not only my religious identity, but then my national identity, both are caught up in a certain amount of protesting or disloyalty.
And leaving because I don't like what you're doing.
And which then unfortunately adds to that our current consumer mentality. Well, if I don't like what we're doing, I'm just gonna go find people that I can hang out with, that I do like. Yeah.
Yeah.
Until they say something there and I'll leave them as well.
But I think that's our call as the church, is to be countercultural, to go out into the world and have these conversations with people that are not here, and to say, oh yeah, I know somebody who thinks that way, and then they're expecting you now to start bashing that person, and instead you say, that's the person that I love a lot, and we spend a lot of time together, and I really appreciate their perspective, and I'm glad that we can, talk about those things, because I really deeply understand where they're coming from on this issue, and it helps me to frame what I've got going on. I don't agree with them, but that conversation changes me, and I think that's the part that brings up the fear, right? That even when if you're going to agree that you don't have to agree, the conversation itself changes you, and so then we're losing some control there. We're giving up control over ourselves and what we want to believe to that other person in that relationship.
I would think it's just between God and the person. It's not up to us to make that decision. Him and the Lord.
You're touching on, one of those questions of what it means to be in community. What's the basis of community? What do we have in common here? And what is central and what is conversational? Okay. Money matters. I don't want us to stay here too late. You're welcome. We'll continue next week because it's almost 11:30. So we'll continue this discussion. I had already planned for 2 anyway. So I do want to close out today with this is another reading from Deuteronomy, and this is another. I love this because this is another one of, today my message was about who is God. And so it comes from the answer for me comes from the first commandment. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. And so Deuteronomy 10, the next 5 chapters after the 10 commandments are an extended meditation on the first commandment. I am the Lord your God. And so this is a good reminder for me of who God is, so I can go out and share that with other people. And so even now, as we're talking through the whys, without you even knowing it, your years of being formed in churches, your years of experience are starting to make those theological questions come up. Even if you don't know it yet, even if it hasn't risen to the surface, it's started, it's working. And so I just want to close with this. This is Deuteronomy chapter 10, verses 15 and 17 through 19. The Lord set his heart in love on your ancestors alone and chose you, their descendants after them, out of all the peoples as it is today. For the Lord your God is God of gods and Lord of lords, the great God, mighty and awesome, who is not partial and takes no bribe, who executes justice for the orphan and the widow, and who loves the strangers, providing them food and clothing. You shall also love the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. Thank you very much for being here this morning. And if you're able to come join us next week, we'll continue asking those why questions and looking at those responses so far. And if you're not, fear not, it will be online for you on YouTube. Hello, YouTube. So thank you very much, and we'll meet again here next week.